Hello everyone. In this video we're going to be going over the Tofflemire retainer and how to put it together. For this activity you're going to need, this is called your Tofflemire retainer and this is called your matrix band. You'll just need one of these. I would recommend watching this video through and then maybe if you've never done this before, then you can play the video again and kind of go through it step by step and actually do this along with me and then pause the video as needed. But if this is your first time doing this and this is new to you, I would recommend watching the video through once so that you have a good idea of the total concept before you start actually trying to put this together. So a little bit of background on the Tofflemire retainer. If you've done this before, you probably have a way that you remember how to put it together the correct way, and that works for you, and that's great. A lot of people have their own way of remembering and figuring out how to do this. There's a couple different methods to it. I'm going to show you what works best for me and what I always teach, but just know that there is only one correct way to put this together. There's not like multiple outcomes that are correct. There's only one correct outcome. There's different ways to do it, but we're looking for one single outcome. So there's only one correct answer at the end of this project. And so I'll show you how to get there. This Tofflemire, will go over the parts of this. I had a lab instructor last year who was an older gentleman who was a retired dental lab technician who ran his own dental lab. And this was really his first time seeing the Tofflemire was in our dental materials lab. And he was just amazed by it. He was like, wow, this is really, it's very small and it seems kind of, olden or barbaric in some types of ways, like some of our dental equipment does. But truly, it's actually a pretty neat piece of equipment. It's like its own little machine. And it's very cool the way it really does what it's supposed to do. And it is very successful at it, which is why we still use the Tofflemire quite a bit today. And you will put these together many, many times during your restorative courses at PCC. So this is the actual Tofflemire retainer. We'll kind of look at the parts of it. So you'll see at this end, there are two, what we call knobs. This one is called the outer knob, the smaller one, and this one is called the inner knob. I usually just call them the little knob and the big knob because I think that is a little bit more explanatory. So little one and the big one, but they're called the outer knob and the inner knob. There is, if I unscrew this small knob, you'll see here that there's it's a little screw and there's a little point on it. That little point is called the spindle pin, and that's what actually is going to hold this metal band in this little chamber. This little slot that goes through this block here, I don't know if this block actually has a name, but I just call it the block. But this diagonal slot is called the diagonal slot to receive the ends of the band. And then over here, I just call this part at the end the U. And there's a little slot in that, and that is the outer slot that holds the position of the band. And so if you turn the small knob, it's going to move the spindle pin. And what you want is you want it to actually go into that little block. And I don't know if we can see on the video, but if you look really, really closely, you'll be able to see it in that diagonal slot when you screw it down enough and then see it's coming out the other end. That's too far. We won't be able to put it together like that. But that's the idea, is that it actually goes through that block there. And then this larger knob, if I hold this and I turn the larger knob, what that's going to do is that actually is moving the block. So you can see that the block then moves away from this U at the end. So it's kind of stretching it. So the small knob, by tightening the small knob inside of the block, what that does is that's going to, once we get the band in the Tofflemire, the small knob is what's going to tighten the band and actually hold it into the end here, and so it won't slip out. The large knob, by turning that and moving the block this way, that's after you put this on a tooth. That large knob is going to tighten the band around the actual tooth. So that's the difference between those two knobs. So now we want to talk about actually putting this together and how we do that. And so again, remember, there is only one correct outcome, but there can be different ways to kind of go about the process. So again, I'm going to show you what works for me. So the first thing I want to do is you want to make sure that this block is touching the U. So you don't want this block to have a gap here. It needs to be all the way to the end. So it needs to be touching the U. And you can do that by either unscrewing the pin and then just scooting it, or you may have to fiddle with both knobs until it gets where it needs to go. And then what you want to do is you want to, while it's touching the U, you want to take the small knob and you want to screw it just enough so that you get that spindle pin into the block. You don't want to screw it down. So again, here we have it, it's loose. I'm gonna just screw it a couple times just so that it's inside the block. So it's kind of stabilized, but I'm not pushing it all the way through. Okay, so now we want to talk about the band. So you see that the band has two, it's a shape. So it's kind of like a U or a V. I like to think of it as a smile or a mountain. So there's two different ends to it. One is the occlusal end and one is the gingival end. Personally, the way my brain works, I don't just look at it and remember off the top of my head, but the way you can tell, and you may or may not be able to tell, is that when you fold the band in half, when you fold a band, do not fold it, like don't squish this end. You want to make a little teardrop shape. You don't want to flatten it down, okay? So when you fold a band, just grab the ends and pull them together so that it makes a little teardrop shape. And when you do that, and then you hold it on its side, you'll kind of see that there's like a little curve to the band. I'm gonna turn it over. So there's kind of a little curve, and then this end, you can see it kind of has a slight slant to it, like kind of an angle like this. And this opening down here, that is smaller than this opening up here. So what that means is that this bottom edge, that is the gingival edge, and this is the occlusal edge. Because if you think about a tooth, when you go down towards the cervical third of the tooth, down towards the gingiva, that diameter of the tooth is going to be smaller than going up towards the occlusal surface. So that's the gingival and the occlusal. And then the same thing, if we flip it over, you can still see there's that shape. So you can see that there's a bit of a curve and that there's also now an angle kind of going this way. And you can see this is the smaller end. This is the larger end. So this is the gingiva and this is the occlusal. So that's that. So it's good to be able to identify that. And then now let's talk about how we actually put this into the Tofflemire and get that correct. So what I like to do is say you want to make your band a smile. So you see that my band is smiling. And then you want to take your Tofflemire and you want your Tofflemire to also be smiling. So see how my U is a little smile. So you want two smiles. And then what you're going to do is you're going to, with your band smiling, so you have to make sure in this process you don't flip one over. So you have both smiling. You're going to take your band and fold it over so that the ends are together. And then you're going to slide the band down into the Tofflemire. So what you'll see is that the ends of the band are in this diagonal slot, and then they're going through the slot in the center of the Tofflemire, okay? When you do this, you want to make sure that the tails, so these little ends right here that are coming out of that diagonal slot, are very small. You want to make sure that you can see just a little bit. So like the ends are together and I can see like what, 1 millimeter. You don't want to have a big long tail like that because then you're not going to have enough of a band to actually fit around a tooth. So you're typically going to want just a little bit of a tail, okay? So then what I do is I like to just make sure the band is down. So I'm going to put my thumb here. I see a little tail, and then you're going to take the small knob and you're going to turn it to tighten it, and you want to really tighten it. And then what that's going to do is that is pushing your spindle pin through the block, so it's actually hitting the band and pushing on the band to hold it in place. So then if I tug on the band, it's not going to come out. It's staying in there. So then that's kind of the first step to putting it together. And so the band has to go in that way. So then you'll see that here's the diagonal slot. And if I turn this to the side, you'll see that this is the gingival end of the band. The gingival end always has to be here where the diagonal slot is. So if I turn it over, there's no diagonal slot. I can see the top of the U there, and this is the occlusal end. That is always how this band goes together. People will put it together upside down and they'll say, I don't understand the difference. Well, there is a difference. And so this is the correct way to put it together. So make sure you are able to understand that. So now there is a last step to kind of putting this into place. So I'm going to go ahead and bring my Typodont over to show you what this last step is. So the last step is that if you think of your patient, if I take this band and I put it around a tooth, see if I can actually do this while I'm on camera. There we go. Okay, so I put this around a tooth. Look at where my Tofflemire is. It's like sticking straight out, and your patient has a cheek here. Like, that's not going to work. So the band has to come this way. So we don't just like push it like I'm doing now. We actually switch the position of the band in the Tofflemire so that it fits on whichever tooth we're going to be working on. So let's talk about that. So to do that, what I'm going to do is I am going to loosen the small knob. So I'm just unscrewing the knob just so that I can move this band. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the band, and it depends on which tooth you're working on. As you're putting this together for this first activity, you don't need to worry about this. But what you're going to do is you just swing it to one side. So see how I took it it was pointing out through the center, and I just swung it through there to one side. You can also take it and swing it to the other side. And so you're gonna put it on one side or the other, depending on the tooth you're working on. So let me go ahead and I'm gonna tighten it up in this position. So I'm gonna make sure my band is nice and snug in there, and I'm gonna tighten the small knob, and I'm gonna give it a tug so it's nice and tight in there. And so now my band is pointing out to one direction. So now if I go to my Typodont, remember that this is the gingival end down here. The way I remember is I don't like look at the band and say, oh, okay, that's gingival, that's occlusal. The way I remember it is that I know that the diagonal slot is the gingival side. And so whenever I put this on a tooth, the diagonal slot needs to face the gingiva. So if I go to this tooth, that's correct because I can't see the diagonal slot. This is the occlusal end. So when I put this on the tooth, it's gonna be the correct position. Let me see if I can push it down there. It's not going to want to go all the way down right now, but you'll see that the band then lies along the buccal surface and it's pointing out of the mouth. If I take this band and I come over to this side, you'll see that I'm not going to stick it on the lingual. It has to go on the buccal. But if I flip this over, now my gingival end is the end pointing up. So this is incorrect. So if I was working on one of these teeth, I would need to loosen up the small knob, flip the band to the opposing side, and then it would be correct for this tooth. So hopefully that kind of makes sense. I'm going to do another video talking about how to actually put it on the Typodont. For this video, the real purpose is just figuring out the correct way to actually put this contraption together, just getting the band in, tightening it up, and getting it ready to go. So make sure and check your assignment and what exactly I want you to do for this, but this video will be the one that helps you for this assignment. One other quick thing I want to mention pertaining to our remote lab assignments is these bands. I think I only gave you guys maybe 5 of these bands, and you'll need to use them for a couple projects in both DH 230 and 240. So please don't mess them all up on the first try. You can reuse the bands if they're not totally mangled. So just try to be gentle with them so that you can reuse them if you need to. Make sure you just are gentle with them, and make sure you really know what you're doing before you try to attempt putting it together or any activities, and go slow as you do it. That way, if you mess one up, it's not the end of the world. But just know you're going to have to do a couple of assignments with these bands, so you want to make sure you keep them kind of in good order.